And
All
we're
right.
back.
And we're
We're
back.
back for the break.
So, Andy, if you had one question about self-hypnosis that would make an absolutely massive difference to you, I wonder what it might be.
Yeah, the one that I am studying just now is I set myself up, I set an intention of how I want to be.
Yeah.
Now, I'm reading a lot about it, and some people actually record suggestions
Yeah.
and put it on their phone and play it. But I'm thinking that's like, you might as well just listen to hypnotic tape or
Yeah,
something else.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah. And other people, so how do I get what I'm wanting to achieve? Do I set an intention and then do I just kind of go into a trance for, say, 20 minutes? Or do I try and talk to myself when I'm in trance? Because I would think that would bring me out of the trance if I'm trying to talk.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm kind of, I'm a bit lost in that because normally I'd say that I'll set the intention, I want to feel better, and I'll just let myself go. But other people are saying like, in fact, probably who you met at the convention, Mr. Jacqueline.
Yeah.
He's got a new book out in self-hypnosis. I'll have to talk about that sometime. He's actually talking a lot about talking during hypnosis, but I thought that would kind of bring you up a bit.
Yeah, yeah, it's extremely good question.
Yeah, because I'm trying to hypnotize myself, then I'm trying to remember what I'm going to say to myself. It's like, it's, what's the
Okay.
word? Yeah, it's trying to scratch yourself, but you don't get the same when you scratch yourself, it's not the same as somebody else.
Yeah. All right. I think that this is a really, really good question. And I think we can remedy this, right? We can find the middle way between these two things because this is an entirely valid point.
Yeah.
And it's something, and just to sort of go off on a slight tangent, I'm very well trained and well versed in clean language. And clean language is an approach to, if we want to call it an approach to trance work, you could call it interactive trance work. So if you see classical hypnotic trance work, you've got the hypnotist doing a lot of talking and facilitating, and the hypnotist is usually largely quiet. And it's going along with the flow of it, and maybe there's some ideomotor signals, but there's not much talking required.
Mm.
If you look at sort of more clean languagey Grovian facilitation, you'll see a lot more interaction right now. So I could say to you, Andy, in this moment right now, if you could make one change that would make a really big difference to you within how you are feeling and experiencing, what would that be?
Just feel a lot more grounded.
Feel a lot more grounded.
A lot more grounded, yeah.
Right. And grounded. If you're feeling grounded, you know it, right?
Yes.
Yes. So what is it you would experience within yourself in feeling grounded like this?
I feel connected. I'd actually feel heavier,
Right.
feel calmer,
Right.
to have a sense of control.
Okay. So connected, heavier,
Yeah.
calmer,
Yeah.
and a sense of control.
Mm.
Right. So I'm going to pause that process there because I'm just demonstrating like a sort of style of interactive trance work. Now, while we're doing that, you're accessing some of those senses and some of those feelings and some of those elements, and they're starting to come alive within your system.
Yeah.
Right. And you're talking because you're labeling the things. You're searching and feeling into yourself and coming up with labels, and I'm feeding them back. And actually, I'm looking to see that you're checking those back in and they fit. Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like an interactive trance work. And then language, your language systems are involved in that. Right. Now, there's something really important when you're doing that kind of work, and that is that the person is checking their language against what's unfolding in their body. Right. Because when people talk, they can either talk in a way that remains connected to what might be called their felt sense systems. I think we talked about Gendlin stuff before in one of the previous videos.
Yeah.
It's really important that those words don't just run off on their own in some abstract space.
Right. This is
Right.
interesting.
So they remain connected. They remain connected to felt sense or what's going on in the body. Okay. Now, if you can do that, that's great. And people ought to be able to do that because, in a sense, that language stuff, that's left hemisphere. The other stuff is right hemisphere. So if you're keeping them connected, you've got both hemispheres working co-creatively, which is actually, if you look at Stephen Gilligan's work, that is what he would call the creative mind. The creative mind isn't the right hemisphere and it isn't the left hemisphere. The creative mind is the right and left hemisphere working really well together. Right? Now, the risk. Now, a lot of the time we live in a world where we're very left hemisphere biased, right? One of the good things about classic trance work is it's like your conscious mind can drift away, i.e. your left hemisphere can drift away, and your unconscious mind or your right hemisphere. So it's getting somebody, it's like a remedial thing, getting them out of being overly left hemisphere oriented into being more right hemisphere oriented. But really, when the two hemispheres are working together, that's when they're working really well and working creatively. If you're working with another person and as soon as they start talking, they disconnect and they go into a left hemisphere space, I think that it's going to really serve them to be facilitated in a more classic trance work way and a less interactive trance work way. If they can keep those two things touching each other, right, in communication, then an interactive thing can work. Okay. Now, same is true for self-hypnosis. So you can use all of your intelligence systems. You can use your language system as long as it doesn't pull you out of your other intelligence systems.
Right.
Right. So this is why, and I think we talked about this before, like you can, when you come to intelligence systems, you could say left hemisphere, right hemisphere. That's one model. But you could say your kind of intellectual or your conceptual is one intelligence system. Your felt sense system or your interoceptive system is another intelligence system. Your somatic, literally how you move and the tension patterns and the release patterns in your body, that's another intelligence system used in idiodynamic work. And your symbolic system, that's another system, i.e. metaphors, symbols, these kinds of things, symbolic imagery. And lastly, the last intelligence system that I tend to think about is your episodic, i.e. memory content, that kind of thing. All of these, and there could be arguments that there are more or less. These are just ways of slicing the cake of our overall intelligence. If you look at these, say, so I've given 5 intelligence systems there. By the way, just as an aside, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory is another way of slicing the intelligence systems pie, right? And if you include auditory digital as well, right? So you can look at different models for slicing the pie and look at, right, the value here is in interacting these systems, in creatively interacting these systems. This is my view on the value of it. So I think that when it comes to self-hypnosis, I'm not going to say this right now. I want to say the basis for my self-hypnosis approach is Eugene Gendlin's focusing. That might not be true that it's the basis, but it's like a major piece. And if I was to say to somebody, someone said, where do I learn self-hypnosis? I would suggest they look at focusing as a good starting point because it starts to teach you that way of keeping that intellectual and conceptual system, which apparently resides up here for me. Right? Because I'm not doing that consciously when I'm doing that.
Yeah.
Right. But apparently I have this spatially organized up here, right? Unconsciously, but now I've become conscious of it. And maybe it's part of my somatic accessing pattern, the body, to actually touch this. Maybe that makes a difference. That's why when you move differently, you touch different places, that can be that can activate new creative intelligence flows. And this can all be part of self-hypnosis. So like the thing about like focusing is it teaches you to run that system and the felt sense system at the same time and create a connection between the two in the dialogue. Right? That's a
So,
really good basis for self-facilitating hypnosis.
so are you doing that when you're classically hypnotizing yourself? This is what I'm trying to get
Yeah,
a bit more up. So are you talking to yourself under when you're hypnotized, or some people might have a right before I go into hypnosis, I want this, 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 and then
right. So you can do that. Absolutely. Right. And there are different approaches because you were saying about I really think that Erickson's two bouts with polio recovery highlight the two different approaches really well. The first time Erickson had polio, he did a lot of conscious direction of different things within his mind. So he's kind of consciously directing uh different mind shifts, let's say, and different attentional patterns and these sort of things. A very consciously directed process. And he did incredible things to rebuild his physicality, having been almost completely paralyzed.
mm,
Then, when he got post polio syndrome at 51, he just set an intention and went into trance,
ah,
right? Completely different. Now, here's the thing I think Bill O'Hanlon said, people who'd studied with Erickson will always go around saying, trust your unconscious mind, but not everybody had Erickson's unconscious mind. And I think that Erickson's later self-hypnosis stuff, where he just sets direction and goes into trance, he's then able to utilize all sorts of rich inner skills that he developed through his earlier, more consciously directed work. Right. So it's like when you learn to drive a car. First of all, you're paying attention to a lot of different things, but then you can just trust your unconscious mind to drive. Right. When you get out, okay, you're consciously aware, you are paying attention, but you trust your unconscious mind to drive the car. Right. That's great because you have an unconscious mind that knows how to drive a car.
right.
If you had first got into a car, never learned to drive a car, and said, I'm just going to go into a hypnotic state now and just give my unconscious mind an instruction to drive this car perfectly. Right.
So for people watching this, what I'm hearing is that maybe when we begin to learn self-hypnosis, it may be better to have a script or record stuff or talk to yourself because we don't know how to drive the car yet.
Yeah.
If I was a good advanced driver, I could just go, right, I'll set an intention, put myself in a trance, and off I go for a drive.
Yes, that's one
Your
way of doing
metaphor.
it. And the other way is to look at self-hypnosis as being a set of you can always get better at self-hypnosis. And you don't get better at self-hypnosis by just going, I'm going to go into a trance and go into the same trance in the same way over and over again. That won't make you better at self-hypnosis. It will get you everything it gets you and nothing that it doesn't. So I'm not knocking it. If you were to consider instead, what if there were 1,000 ways to do self-hypnosis and I explored all of them? What you end up having is a rich unconscious competence. And that means you're able to just go, right, I'm going to enter into a creative self-hypnotic flow now. And you can just choose to go, one, and set an intention. And everything that you've explored goes with it, right? So different people will approach self-hypnosis in different ways. Some people are just desperate for a technique that'll help them fix the problems in their life. That's understandable. No judgment on that. And again, whatever technique you choose will give you just exactly the results that it gets you and none of the ones that it doesn't. Right?
Right. So how do we get the ones that we might?
So here's the way I would approach this. There's a question that I love to ask clients. I'll ask you this, Andy. I don't know if I've ever asked you this before. But is there anything a human being can do that cannot be done in a variety of different ways?
No, I don't think so. I think they can do. I think a human can do things, many things in many different ways.
Right. So you can do many things in many different ways. Now, I usually ask clients this, and then I say, and that problem that you've just told me about, do you do that in a variety of different ways? And they say no, right? But aside from that, I think that, you build skill by learning to do things in a variety of different ways, and then allowing something new to emerge from that. You allow your way to emerge ultimately from all the other ways that you explored, right? Or at least this is one very good way of doing it. Some simpler things in life, you don't need that. Somebody just shows you a simple method, right? Here's how you peel potatoes. You don't really need a variety of different ways for potato peeling, but mine's are much more complex things.
Mhm.
So if you go out there and you start looking at different approaches to self-hypnosis, or any kind of mind-shifting stuff, because there are a lot of meditation. See, I look at meditation as being slightly different from self-hypnosis, but all of the skills you develop with meditation can become part of your self-hypnosis flow, right?
Yeah.
Well, I use this term hypnotic flow, and I just like literally came back from the hypnosis conference, and I'd ordered Anthony's book, and it was there when I got back, and he's talking about self-hypnosis flows, which is an interesting thing because we've got that kind of same terminology. And I think, having scanned the content of his book, I haven't looked at it yet, I think we're largely on the same page when it comes to self-hypnosis. There's going to be differences, but so it's about this thing about becoming hypnotically skillful, internally skillful. How many different ways can you move your mind? How many different intelligent systems can you interact? Now, to start off with, you can go, am I doing self-hypnosis to create a change in my life, or am I learning self-hypnosis so I can become adept at creating changes in my life? Well, I reckon you can do both at the same time.
Right.
So one way of doing this is you can actually go, right, I'm going to explore this hypnotic material and I have this goal. So you can set an intention ahead of time. Go, my goal is to, I don't know, be more grounded, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so you can set an intention up front, go, what I would like to get from this, as well as my learnings about self-hypnosis, is a deepening of my grounding, right? That is what I would like, right? This is going to be about a deepening of my grounding and learning more about what's possible in self-hypnosis. So you can set that intention ahead of time,
Mhm.
and you can even stop if you want and take a moment to do a deal with your unconscious mind and say, let me just check in with myself. Would you be open to learning unconsciously anything, or taking from this process anything that will be useful for me in deepening my grounding both today and in the future, right? So you can set that intention and put it aside and now go, right, now we're going to explore with some interesting self-hypnosis stuff.
Right.
Right.
So you're doing that kind of verbally when you first start, before you go into a trance.
Yes, you can, but I want to just make this clear, right? Words are less important than people often think,
Right.
right? What's more important is intention. Now, I'm a martial arts guy. I'm a Chinese martial arts guy, and they talk about intention a lot. They talk about like having forward intention. Say in Wing Chun, you've got a Tan Sao. It's got a forward intention, right? It's not you're pushing it forward. It's like just like it wants to go there. Like intention is where something wants to go, but you're not forcing it to go there. It's just where it wants to go. So a lot of the time, I think what we're doing linguistically is setting an intention or an attitude, and the words aren't important. If you have the intention and the attitude, you don't need the words, right? If the words are there to help you set the intention and the attitude, right?
Right. Okay. This is key. Yeah.
I think it really is, because if you say the words like they've got magic and you're just saying them like an empty script, then they're not setting the intention, the attitude, right? It's like in something like a 6-step reframe where you go, okay, so thank that part for all that it has done for you in helping you achieve X, Y, and Z, right? If somebody just goes, thank that part for blah, 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 right? They're just disconnected words. There's no intention or attitude behind them. There's no real gratitude in it. There's no real acknowledgement in it. So the words have to remain connected to what's in the body, and they want to be shaping intention, attitude. And here's the thing: once you get used to this concept, and this is what happens for me a lot, is I don't know whether I'm using words or not in my hypnosis flows, self-hypnosis flows, but I am directing attention and intention and shifting attitude, and being curious as to what comes through. So like a basic idea in focusing might be, say you've got a problem, right? What's going on in your life? And you're going around your head, and you stop and slow yourself down. And you feel what you feel in your body and go, whereabouts am I experiencing this the most? Okay, in my chest. Okay. So let me just be with that for a moment and just sit with that. And what could this be about? Right now, that question, what could this be about? The question isn't as important as the way it directs attention and intention. So when you streamline it, you don't need the question anymore. You just go there and do it. The same with Sedona method. Sedona method, you usually set somebody up with a pen and you say, could I let this go?
Yeah.
Am I willing to let this go? When? And then that's just a metaphor. And then you start to find things within yourself, maybe beliefs, maybe places where you've been overly attached to things, and you run the process. Could I let this go? Am I willing to let this go? When? Anyone that works with Sedona rapidly doesn't need to say all those words anymore. Because what that process has done is set like an intentional and attentional pattern. So they go, oh, there's something. And they go, and they rattle through it just by setting the intention. They don't have to do the facilitation anymore because it's already kind of set up.
But so for somebody wanting to learn self-hypnosis, it's better to get a structure first and build it up. So what we're talking about is more advanced, maybe once you've done
right. Look, here's the thing. There's so many entry points to this.
Yeah.
I like focusing. I think focusing is a good entry point. You could look at focusing, Eugene Gendlin's focusing. You could look at that and go, that's a self-hypnosis system, right? And it's a good one for enabling you to get into flows and self-facilitation and interaction in a kind of like organic way without having to listen to some external recording or.
Yeah.
And it will build skills, and it will build skills you can carry in your life. Because it will build skills where you can end up doing little bits of micro self-hypnosis while you're stood at the bus stop or when you're about to go into the meeting or whatever without having to take a big bunch of time out and do like a big session. There's one entry point. There's various meditation practices that can be really good entry points. I like, again, another big influence for my self-hypnosis and for my hypnosis with other people, actually, is Les Femi's open focus stuff.
Yep.
And Sedona method, I really like Sedona method. You see, it doesn't matter. Any method you work and work deeply and honestly starts to contribute to your skill set, right? So I favor methods that don't require external things like tape recordings and stuff like that. I prefer ones that have a certain interactivity in the process, i.e., it can follow what unfolds rather than necessarily enforcing something on it. So it's got flexibility and adaptiveness in the process. But like literally any kind of skill set. So like here's a book here. Do you know this book?
No.
Mind Games by R.E.L. Masters and Gene Houston. This is it's actually 4 books compiled into one.
Wow.
So this is a book. It's called Mind Games, but they're all kind of like based in hypnosis and to a certain degree Eriksonian hypnosis. These people used to run mind games groups where people would get together and somebody would facilitate the mind games. They're just mind games. They're just different ways of moving your experience. So one of them, for example, and I've been going through this recently, and some of these you can very easy to do on your own. So there's one where you take yourself into a trance state. They give methods for doing it, but you can go any way you like, right? Anything that works for you. You've got the Betty Erickson induction on your channel.
Yeah.
That's a way in. You could do some focusing, anything just to shift into that state. John Grinder might call the stopping the world state or the know nothing state or something like that. It's a good start point. Fall out of your thinking. That's a good start point. And you get into that. So there's one here where you just shift from experiencing heaviness in your body and your system to experiencing all the lightness within that heaviness.
Oh, I like that.
Right. And then you become very light, and then you experience the heaviness within the lightness. Right. And it's just that you go, what's the point of that? Because you're training and you're realizing I have an ability to make these fine adjustments within within one layer of experience. Now you could do that as an exercise on its own, and you could set an intention ahead of time just to simply learn something more deeply about what's possible for you in terms of self-hypnosis, right? Or to learn something more deeply about what's possible for you in terms of altering your experience, right? Or you could go, and actually, at the moment, I'm looking to increase my groundedness. So I'm going to do this exercise, and I would also like to just take a moment to be with my unconscious mind and set an intent, right? I would love to learn something from this that can connect with my goal of groundedness, or I wonder what I will learn from this that will connect with my goal of groundedness. Questions are great, right? And then you kind of leave it open and you don't pick over it afterwards. You just open yourself to the possibility that interesting things can and will unfold from this, right? Which again is setting an intention. I open myself to the possibility that interesting things can and will unfold from this. If I just hear how I said that sentence, the first time I was connected to the true intention that it was shaping. The second time I just said the words,
Oh, yeah.
right? So like this is it Neville Goddard that wrote the book, the secret is the feeling, or the feeling is the secret, or something like that. I don't know. The point was, he was saying for people who try and do manifestation stuff, they're often rattling their words out, but it's the feeling that counts.
Yeah, they
Right?
got
You want to,
connect.
yeah, you've got to connect. So what you want to do is make sure your words are always connected. You could say to your feelings or to your body, but like get a sense they're just connected to more of your intelligence systems, whatever they are, and you're not just rattling the words like as like some kind of empty mantra or something like that. Right. So you can set that, and then you can go through the experience of heaviness and lightness. Right. And I'll sometimes do that. And then sometimes if I'm just playing around with self-hypnosis, once I've done a formal process like that, I'll just let myself stay in a trance and see what comes through, see what comes up, see what emerges, and go on a sort of trance magic carpet ride, which could be good
Yeah.
or not, right? In which case, if something, I had a client yesterday and they seemed a bit like, they seemed a bit activated and tense at the beginning of the session. This is just a business coaching thing. And I could see they were looking a bit flushed. And it looked like their breathing was a bit shallow and they were doing a lot of eye accessing. And they didn't look like they were in a good state. They didn't look like they were in like a, they looked a bit activated, let's say, in not a good way. And I asked them, what they might like to get from today's session. And I immediately kind of started to go into some trance work stuff by just having them kind of expand out, fall uh, into a kind of working space, let's say trance wise. But immediately, like a bunch of stuff came up that was negative for them, right? They were troubled about some things that were happening in the world and they got upset by that. And that's because inside of that trance, their mind started to create something that was taking them away from being resourced and grounded and that kind of thing. So for some people, just going into an undirected trance flow, their habits of mind might bring up less than positive things.
Yeah.
In which case, that's absolutely fine, but you want to be skilled in meeting those. And this comes back to that point, is recognizing anything that comes up, we don't have to give our mind to it. Okay. There's a really nice meditation that I like to do. And I've taught this a few times, where I will encourage people to get into a sense of space, right? Get into a sense of their mind space. How big is your mind space? Now, you could do this, you do this with eyes closed, but you get a sense of the space that is mind. All of my mind is space, as empty space, and that thoughts will want to move through the space, right? And you want to watch the thoughts move through the space. But what wants to happen oftentimes is these thoughts, it's almost like if they touch the space in a particular way, they explode out into the space and the whole space becomes filled with that thought and the energy of that thought and the reality of that thought. And suddenly the thought comes alive. So the thought's not in the mind space anymore. The thought becomes the mind space. The mind space collapses into the thought, or the thought expands out. And I call this igniting. The thought ignites. It ignites into an inner reality, right? Now, this happens to us all the time. We don't even know it. Right? Some thoughts drift through. Some thoughts go and explode and capture us. And it's like we've given our whole mind to that thought, that idea. You know, like somebody might go, oh my God, what if I left the iron on, right? And the thought doesn't flow through. It's just like boom, and they just can't think of anything else. They have to go back and check the iron. And I guess this is perhaps what happens with like some OCD symptoms is the thought ignites to go and check and go, but then the thought reignites again.
Yeah.
So part of a good self-hypnosis skill set is learning how to meet those thoughts as they come up, meet the things that come up, and to be able to, and this is like in NLP is association, dissociation, right? You want to be able to dissociate. You want to be able to go back into the mind space and see the thought as just a thought, just one of many potential thoughts. That's extremely useful. There's a phrase I got from Stephen Gilligan, and he said he got this from his old Aikido teacher when doing Aikido sword work. Don't give your mind to the enemy, right? And that reminds me of knife work, right? If you give your mind to the knife of your opponent, it's over, right? You have to see everything. You have to keep in an open focus, or you get stuck with the knife, right? You focus on the knife. It's kind of the same. You can give your mind to a thought, and it will have you. Now, if that thought is generative and creative and interesting and cutting new ground, and you give your mind to that thought, which is part of doing self-hypnosis, great. But if the thought that comes up is negative and self-devaluing and all of this kind of thing, and you give your mind to it, not so great.
Yeah.
Right? So this is one of the things about this part of the skill set is how you meet what comes up within the trance flow, right? And developing the skill to meet what comes up within that trance flow. This is a serious life skill because most people do not really have much choice in how they meet the thoughts that come up for them. Certain thoughts will capture them, certain thoughts won't, but they're like, well, I don't have any power or choice with that.
So you know how to overcome that.
In myself.
Yeah, but you could maybe, I'm thinking about next time, hint, we could talk about that more about thoughts and
well, I'll tell you what, and maybe this is the key to this. Okay, I'm going to say this now so that we can use this as a key to activate the continuing of this conversation. There's a simple way that I sometimes talk about this when I'm talking to clients, which is the distinction of up above it versus down in it, right? And the reason I always think about this is because I was a big Nine Inch Nails fan back in the early 90s. And in the 1989 album, Pretty Hate Machine, there's a track called Up Above It. And the lyrics go, I was up above it, but now I'm down in it, right? That's the chorus. I was up above it, now I'm down in it. But there's so much of life is like that. Sometimes we're just kind of like up above it. We're free from a particular constricting thought. We are beyond it. And then other times we can end up like down in it again. So this is the case with any mind-made reality. It can either not be there, or it can, when it's there, we can either be up above it or down in it, right? So I'm always like, you're up above it or you're down in it. When you're down in it, it's got you. You are it. All trance is identity, as Stephen Walensky has said. So that skill of being able to be up above our own experience or aside from our own experience or alongside our own experience or whatever, but just not down in it, right? Not had by it fully. This is a fundamental internal skill that is probably the single most important skill for liberating ourselves from what Milton Erickson would call habitual associative sets, i.e. the mind cascades that go off on their own and take us to the places we may not want to go, right? So if we talk about that kind of up above it, down in it, I think this is a powerful thing to train within ourselves. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's the be all and end all, and it's the only tool you ever need, but it's an extraordinarily useful tool because it means you can always come to a place of choice, which is the place to dissociate, the place to step back, the place where you can look at things in a variety of different ways. That is the key. Erickson said when he was asked just before he died, what is the single biggest, what's the single cause? If you had to pick a single cause for all human problems, what is it? Erickson said rigidity, right? That was his one word answer, rigidity. The developing the capacity to relate to our lives and our experiences and literally everything in a variety of different ways instead of just one way is ultimately the key to liberation,
Wow.
right? Um,
This is fascinating because in a way we talk about the self-hypnosis.
yeah,
And for a long time, all I thought self-hypnosis was the Betty Erickson technique.
right,
I
right.
think a lot of people like that. And there's just so many, as you say, I mean, all hypnosis, self-hypnosis. And it's amazing how there's, as they say, there's levels to this game, you know?
There
And
is, and it becomes an inner skill set. This is the thing people miss. Erickson was adept because he did so much stuff within himself. He didn't just like go, oh, I've got my self-hypnosis technique now.
yeah, pick five things.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to like anybody watching this, like, I'm not trying to say that, some simple methods can't do you good or work. They absolutely can, but it depends how far you want to go and how much of a game of inner transformation that you want to develop.
This so excites me because I mean, on this channel, the Betty Erickson's like by far my most popular video. Keeps
Mm,
me love. But and people are saying, wow, it really helps. But I'm thinking, this is just the beginning. We can get really deeper and explore. And it's exciting for me because I think it's helping people see what hypnosis can really do.
yeah. And like last thing to say, because I know we've probably done longer on this
Oh,
because I
because
want.
your Lex will be banging on the door.
Yeah, she will. Oh, I don't know what it was. That was the last thing, but that banging on the door thing. See,
So
I gave my mind to that thought.
but there's levels to this game about Betty Erickson and how you can really
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll just leave it at that. There are levels to this game.
there's
And
levels to this game, and
this
I will hold on. Stop.